We need the house. Sign the papers. The text message from my father arrived at exactly 11:51 p.m. No greeting, no preamble. Just a demand blunt as a sledgehammer against a load-bearing wall. I stood in my kitchen, the granite countertop cool under my palms. The house was quiet, that deep settled silence of a well-built structure. My sister Samantha, the family's golden child, needed stability for her baby. Apparently, stability meant my deed, my equity, my home. Tears are a leak in the roof. I patched that weakness years ago. I didn't panic either. Panic is structural failure. I just laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the custom cabinetry I had installed myself. They thought this was a negotiation. They thought I was still the daughter who begged for scraps. They didn't know I had the DNA results sitting in the drawer right next to me. They didn't know their golden child was a fraud. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Hesitation creates structural drag, so I eliminated it. My phone was in my hand before the screen dimmed. I dialed Marcus, my real estate attorney. It was midnight, but Marcus knew my hours. "Lock it down," I said when he answered. "The deed, the title, everything. I want it in a blind trust by morning. If my father or anyone with the last name Miller tries to file a quitclaim, I want it flagged as fraud immediately." "Done," Marcus said. He didn't ask questions. He knew what this house cost me. Not just the $220,000 in savings, but the blood. I hung up and walked through the living room. The Seattle rain was drumming against the roof, a rhythmic, steady beat that usually put me to sleep. Tonight it sounded like a war drum. They looked at this place, this $2.4 million craftsman estate sitting on a hill overlooking the sound, and they saw a prize. They saw a solution to their problems. They saw a family asset. They didn't see the 18 months I spent sleeping on a twin mattress in the corner of a construction zone, breathing in drywall dust because I couldn't afford to rent an apartment while I paid the mortgage. They didn't remember the nights I spent scraping 80 years of rot off the cedar siding until my hands blistered and bled. I built this. I didn't just buy it. I resurrected it. I took a rotting shell that the city had condemned and turned it into a fortress. And while I was doing that, while I was eating ramen and learning how to wire a breaker box from YouTube because I couldn't afford an electrician, my sister Samantha was busy curating her life. Samantha, the family's golden child, the lifestyle influencer. She spent those same 18 months traveling to Tulum and Bali, posting photos of acai bowls and sunsets, building a following of strangers who admired her perfect, effortless existence. She built a brand on being special. I built a life on being capable. But brands don't keep the rain out. And now the rumors were true. Samantha wasn't just living the high life. She was drowning in it. The debt was piling up. Her husband, Zachary, the tech entrepreneur, hadn't launched a successful product in 3 years. They were broke. They needed a bailout. And in my family, bailout was just another word for Alexandra's hard work. My father didn't want the house for the baby. He wanted the equity. He wanted to liquidate my sweat to pay for Samantha's image. He wanted to take the one thing I had built for myself and grind it down into mortar to patch the cracks in her life. I ran my hand along the fireplace mantel. I had sanded this wood by hand. I had stained it. I had sealed it. They thought they could just walk in and take it because they were family. They thought blood was a currency I would accept in exchange for my survival. They were wrong. This wasn't a foundation of sand. I had poured the concrete myself, and I wasn't moving. They didn't wait for an invitation. Saturday evening arrived, and so did they. My father, Jeffrey, my mother, Susan, Samantha, and Zachary. They walked in with the entitlement of potential buyers at an open house, not guests. Zachary didn't even say hello. He walked straight past me, holding a tape measure. I watched him size up the living room wall, the one I had spent 3 weeks plastering by hand. 75 inches, he muttered to Samantha. The gallery wall will fit perfectly here. He was measuring my home for his art. He was redecorating a house he hadn't paid for on a wall he hadn't built. We sat down for dinner at the table I had restored from a salvage yard. The air wasn't festive. It was heavy, pressurized. My father, Jeffrey, sat at the head of the table, my table, and cleared his throat. He had that look he used to get when he was lecturing his students, the look of a man who believes his voice is the only one that carries weight. "We need to discuss the future," he said. He didn't look at me. He looked at the room, admiring the crown molding. This family has a legacy to maintain, and legacy requires asset management. We've decided to place this property into a family trust. A trust, I repeated. The word tasted like ash. For whom? For the baby, Samantha said, rubbing her stomach. For stability. We can't raise a child in a rental alley. You understand that. You're single, Jeffrey added, finally looking at me. You don't need 5 bedrooms. It's excessive. It's selfish. I looked at my mother. Susan. She was sitting to my right, staring intently at the silverware. She picked up a fork, aligned it perfectly with the knife, then moved it back a millimeter. Her hands were shaking. This was the moment. This was where a mother was supposed to speak. This was where she was supposed to say, "No, Jeffrey. She built this. It's hers." But she said nothing. She just kept straightening the fork. For years, I thought she was weak. I thought she was just a victim of Jeffrey's domineering personality. But tonight, watching her tremble in the candlelight, I realized it was something deeper. It was a survival mechanism. It was cognitive dissonance. She knew. Deep down in the basement of her subconscious, she knew the truth about Samantha. She knew that her perfect family was built on a lie she had told 32 years ago. To admit that Jeffrey was being cruel to me, to admit that he was robbing his biological daughter to pay for a stranger's child, would force her to confront the reality of her marriage. It would force her to admit that the entire structure of her life was rot. She couldn't do it. The load-bearing walls of her denial were the only things holding her up. So she sacrificed me. She let him rob me because acknowledging the theft would mean acknowledging the lie. "We've drawn up the papers," Zachary said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "It's a quitclaim deed. We'll handle the refinancing. You can stay in the guest cottage until you find a suitable apartment." The guest cottage. They were offering me the shed in my own backyard. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at Samantha. She wasn't grateful. She looked bored, expectant, like a queen waiting for a subject to kneel. She truly believed she deserved this. She believed the world owed her a mansion because she was special. I didn't touch the envelope. I picked up my wine glass. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, solid and immovable. Jeffrey blinked as if the furniture had suddenly started speaking. "Excuse me." "No," I said again. "I'm not signing over the deed. I'm not moving into the shed." And Zachary put the tape measure away. "You're not hanging anything on my walls." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the sound of a facade cracking. They left in a fury of accusations. Selfish, ungrateful, destroying the family for a house. But as the taillights of Zachary's leased BMW faded into the rain, I didn't feel guilty. I felt cold. Clinical. I locked the door, but rest was impossible. I went to my office instead. I'm an architect. My job isn't just drawing pretty lines. It's understanding stress loads. It's knowing exactly how much pressure a structure can take before it collapses. And right now, my family was the structure, and I needed to find the cracks. Why now? That was the question. Why were they so desperate now? I pulled up the public records on Zachary's tech empire. It didn't take long. The LLCs were dissolved. The last product launch was a disaster. There were liens against their condo. I dug deeper. Credit reports, court filings. Zachary wasn't just broke. He was underwater. They had $300,000 in consumer debt. They needed my house not to live in, but to leverage. They needed the equity to pay off the sharks. But that was just the money. Money explains greed. It doesn't explain the entitlement. It doesn't explain why my father, a man who prided himself on legacy, was willing to cannibalize his own child. I went to the basement. I had boxes of old family files down there, my mother's archives that she had offloaded on me years ago because she didn't have the space. I sat on the concrete floor, surrounded by the smell of old paper and damp earth. I wasn't looking for financial records anymore. I was looking for the timeline. I found my mother's old medical files, a folder labeled 1992. Samantha was born in November of 1992. I flipped through the pages, prenatal visits, ultrasound dates, and then I saw it, a note from her OBGYN, dated February 1992. Patient concerned about conception date. Cycle irregular. I did the math. My father had been on sabbatical in London from January to March of 1992. He wasn't even in the country when Samantha was conceived. The rain hammered against the windows, a relentless drowning sound. I sat there in the silence of my basement, holding the paper that proved my entire life had been a performance. Jeffrey had spent 32 years overcompensating. He had spent 3 decades trying to love a child that wasn't his, trying to prove to himself and to the world that he was a good father, that his family was perfect. And he had done it by sacrificing the one child who actually shared his blood. He had robbed me to pay for the lie. And Samantha the golden child, she wasn't special. She was just the evidence he was too afraid to examine. But then I found something else. A printed email from 6 years ago tucked into a tax file. It was from Samantha to my mother. "I need the money for the trip, Mom. Or do you want Dad to start asking questions about 1992 again?" The air left the room. Samantha knew. She hadn't just benefited from the lie. She had leveraged it. She had been blackmailing her own mother using the secret of her paternity to fund her lifestyle. She wasn't a princess. She was a parasite. I stood up. My knees cracked. The storm outside was raging, but inside everything was perfectly still. I had the blueprint now. I knew exactly where the load-bearing walls were. And I knew exactly how to bring them down. The DNA results arrived on Tuesday morning. I didn't open them immediately. I made coffee. I checked the site plans for the downtown library renovation I was managing. I answered 3 emails. I forced myself to maintain the routine of a normal life, even as the detonator sat in my inbox. When I finally clicked the link, the screen glowed with the final structural assessment of my family tree. Probability of paternity 0%. It was clinical. It was absolute. The man who had demanded my house, who had called me selfish for not supporting his legacy, wasn't Samantha's father. I sat there, the steam from my coffee rising in the cold morning air, and I waited for the shock. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt the satisfying click of a lock tumbling into place. The missing piece of the blueprint had finally been found. But that was just the foundation. The real rot was in the walls. I went back to the printed email I had found in the basement. The one from Samantha to my mother, dated 6 years ago. "I need the money for the trip, Mom. Or do you want Dad to start asking questions about 1992 again?" I read it again, and then I cross-referenced the date. 6 years ago. That was the year Samantha had launched her lifestyle brand. That was the year she had moved into the luxury condo. That was the year my father had suddenly inexplicably dipped into his retirement savings to fund her startup costs. The narrative shifted. For 32 years, I thought Jeffrey was the villain. I thought he was a man who simply loved one daughter more than the other because she was shinier, prettier, easier. I thought he was overcompensating for a subconscious doubt. But Samantha, I always thought she was just a spoiled brat, a beneficiary of circumstance. I was wrong. She wasn't a beneficiary. She was an operator. Samantha knew. She had known for at least 6 years, maybe longer. She knew she wasn't Jeffrey's daughter. And instead of being afraid of that truth, instead of worrying that it might destroy the man who raised her, she had weaponized it. She had turned her own illegitimacy into a credit card with no limit. She knew my mother was terrified of the secret coming out. She knew my father was insecure, desperate to prove the family was perfect. And she played them both. She played the golden child role not because she earned it, but because she was holding a match to the gasoline of their marriage. Every vacation, every car, every bailout. It wasn't love, it was hush money. And now she wanted my house. She wasn't asking for a nursery. She was looking for her next payout. She needed to liquidate my equity to pay off Zachary's debts, and she assumed that because she held the keys to the family's destruction, she was entitled to everything inside it. She thought I was just another asset to be leveraged. She thought I was like our mother, terrified of the noise, willing to pay any price for silence. I looked at the rain streaking the window. It was a gray, heavy day in Seattle, the kind of weather that tests the waterproofing of any structure. My sister wasn't the golden child. She was a parasite. She had been feeding on the insecurities of our parents for years, growing fat on their fear. And now she had made the mistake of trying to attach herself to a host that fought back. I organized the files. The DNA report. The email. The bankruptcy filings for Zachary. I put them all into a single leather portfolio. I wasn't an architect anymore. I was a demolition expert, and the charges were set. They arrived on Wednesday at noon. My father, Jeffrey, my mother, Susan, Samantha, and Zachary. They brought a notary public, a small, nervous-looking man named Carl, who clearly had no idea he was walking into a demolition site. "Let's get this over with," Jeffrey said, stepping into the foyer without wiping his feet. "We have a lunch reservation at 1. He slapped the quitclaim deed onto the kitchen island. Zachary leaned against the counter, scrolling on his phone, already mentally spending the money he thought he was about to get. "Where do I sign?" Samantha asked, reaching for a pen. She didn't look at me. She looked at the room, scanning the walls for the art she hadn't bought yet. "You don't," I said. I placed my leather portfolio on the island right next to their deed. The sound was heavy final. "We're not signing the deed, Samantha. We're signing a different kind of release." "What is this?" Jeffrey asked, his voice tight with impatience. "More drama. Just sign the papers, Alexandra. Stop being difficult." I opened the portfolio. I laid out the documents one by one like tarot cards predicting the end of their world. First, the bankruptcy filings for Zachary. 300,000 in debt, I said. Liens against your condo. Failed product launches. You don't need a nursery, Zachary. You need a bailout. Zachary stopped scrolling. His face went pale. Second, the email from Samantha, the one demanding hush money. "You've been blackmailing Mom for 6 years," I said to Samantha. "That lifestyle brand wasn't funded by investors. It was funded by Jeffrey's retirement paid out to keep you quiet." Samantha froze. Her hand, which had been reaching for the pen, retracted as if the granite had turned to magma. And then the final card, the DNA report. And here's why I said. I slid the paper toward Jeffrey. "Probability of paternity, 0%. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavier than concrete. It pressed against the windows, against our chests. Jeffrey stared at the paper. He didn't explode. He didn't yell. He just deflated. 32 years of posturing, of overcompensating, of trying to be the perfect father to the perfect daughter, it all evaporated. He looked at Susan. "You knew," he whispered. Susan didn't answer. She was weeping, silent, shaking tears that finally acknowledged the rot at the center of her life. But Samantha didn't cry. She stood up, her face twisted, not in grief, but in rage. She slammed her hand onto the counter. "This is mine," she screamed. "I deserve this. You think a piece of paper changes anything. I am the one who made this family look good. I am the one who gave us status. You're just the builder, Alexandra. You're nothing." She wasn't hurt. She was furious. Her scream wasn't sound. It was the frequency of a bridge snapping under too much weight. It wasn't heartbreak. It was a narcissistic injury. Her entire reality, the carefully curated belief that she was special, that she was the princess who deserved the castle, was being shattered. And without that false reality, she was just a person drowning in debt and lies. She wasn't screaming because she lost a father. She was screaming because she lost her audience. "You're not special, Samantha," I said, my voice calm, cutting through her noise. "You're just expensive." I turned to Jeffrey. He was slumped over the island, a man whose legacy had just been revealed as a forgery. "Get out of my house," I said. "All of you. Take your notary. Take your debt. Take your lies. This structure is sound. You're the ones who are condemned." Samantha tried to lunge at me, but Zachary held her back, his eyes wide, with the realization that the money train had just derailed. They left. It wasn't a dignified exit. It was a retreat, a scrambling, desperate evacuation from a reality they could no longer occupy. I locked the door behind them. The click of the deadbolt was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The silence after they left was profound. It wasn't the empty silence of abandonment. It was the peaceful silence of a storm that had finally passed. Jeffrey called me 3 days later. He didn't ask for the house. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just sounded old. "I'm sorry," he said. "I sacrificed the wrong daughter." I didn't tell him it was okay. It wasn't. But I listened. And then I hung up. Susan moved out a week later. The cognitive dissonance had finally shattered, and she couldn't live in the wreckage. She's staying with her sister now, figuring out who she is without the lie. Samantha and Zachary, they lost their condo. The last I heard, they were living in a rental in Bellevue, posting photos of downsizing for clarity. She still hasn't spoken to me. I don't expect she ever will. Her reality requires an audience, and I'm no longer buying a ticket. I stood on my porch this morning, coffee in hand, watching the fog lift off the sound. The house was quiet. My house. For years, I thought I was building this place to prove I was worthy, to prove I was good enough. But standing there feeling the solid wood beneath my feet, I realized the truth. I wasn't building a monument to my worth. I was building a sanctuary for my peace. Being the black sheep, the outsider, the one on the edge, it hurts. It feels like you're freezing while everyone else is inside by the fire. But here's the secret they don't tell you. If you are the one on the edge, it means you have the best view of the exit. It means you are the first one free when the house catches fire. You don't need their approval to build a life that stands up. You just need your own 2 hands, a solid foundation, and the courage to lock the door. If you've ever had to build your own foundation while everyone else tried to tear it down, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to know they aren't alone.